You lose her in the turn, I'll get her. Van Halen, Lyrics to Panama, released 1984. The thing about songs written about sex is that often they can sound rather like songs about invasion as well. And whether it was due to random chance, fate, or just marketing, hearing the song Panama play will give anyone who was sentient in 1989 a tinge of memory of jungle, automatic weapons, and a whiff of scandal. January 3rd, 2026 brought back the memories of that song and of that invasion for many. On the very same day as the surrender of Panama's dictator Manuel Noriega, you're probably wondering why I stopped everything here. The reason is because I am about to make a mistake with the date. It's confusing enough that everything that happened in Panama happened over the New Year. So started in 1989 and ended in 1990. And then when you add the fact that things happened in 2026 on the same day, it's kind of hard to keep everything straight. So, for the record, Manuel Noriega was captured, turned himself in on January 3rd, 1990. But the invasion of Panama began on December 20th, 1989. And now, back to our regular show. In 1989, the U.S. military again paved the way for the arrest of a dictator, this time Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. Now, it seems like an easy, trite comparison, a knee-jerk one to make. The comparison of Panama in 1989 and Venezuela 2026. There are more than enough interventions in world history to make other comparisons, many involving the U.S. and many involving other states. Nor is it only a great powers issue. When Yahya Jammeh of Gambia refused to recognize the election results in 2016, armies of ECOWAS nations in Africa gathered. Jammeh finally stepped down and went into exile as the armies approached in January of 2017. In 1979, 10 years before the Panama invasion, it was Tanzania ridding a neighboring nation of their president. Idi Amin was barely able to escape by helicopter and jet as the troops of Julius Nyerere took control. All of this is extremely simplified, of course, and I highly encourage you to do further research on each incident. And we could possibly go back to 1916 and the U.S. Army looking for Pancho Villa in Mexico, but they didn't get him and went back home in 1917. Pancho Villa himself hung around in power until he was assassinated by his political rivals in 1923. And so, this brings us back to 1989 and Panama. And to discuss Panama in 1989, we should go back to 1968, when a military coup took control of Panama and then was itself overtaken by Omar Torrijos, who managed to withstand a 1969 coup attempt, which was put down by Lieutenant Manuel Noriega. Torrijos' gratitude was immense. Noriega was put in charge of Panama's military intelligence in 1970. At the same time, he was doing a lot of paid work for American intelligence as well. But at the same time, Noriega was also working with cartels and selling American information to American enemies. If Manuel Noriega respected anything at all, it was hustle culture. And hustle Noriega did from the beginning. In 1976, he bribed 6 U.S. service members for wiretap information in the Americas and got a bonanza, the full list of phones and radios the U.S. was monitoring. The list was sold to everyone with an interest, which was basically everyone. But because Latin America was fraught as a situation and a major battlefield between the West and the Soviets, the incident was hushed up. Noriega continued being paid by U.S. intelligence, and when Torrijos was killed in a plane crash, Noriega was able to gather up power himself. He continued selling information to the U.S., about the U.S., and facilitating drug cartel activity. The problem was, even with someone who had gone as far as Noriega without being cut off, could still go too far, which Noriega did on September 13th, 1985, when he was phoned by one of his men with the phrase, "We have the rabid dog." "You know what to do with the dog that has rabies," Noriega replied. The decapitated body of Hugo Spadafora was discovered the next day, stuffed in a U.S. mail bag in Costa Rica. The torture he endured was so horrific, I won't list it. It makes anything seem in the most depraved horror movie seem easygoing. Behind the scenes, the U.S. government was split about dealing with the Panamanian dictator, who was never actually the president of Panama, but rather the power behind a series of personally appointed presidents who didn't actually win their elections, but still won their elections, if you know what I mean. Senator Jesse Helms was holding hearings on Capitol Hill, but no one was paying much attention. And this is where we need to bring in another thread where everything old is new again. The information about Noriega and his extracurricular activities was always out there, even in an age before the internet. The issue was never the lack of public information. It was just that the public wasn't terribly interested. They had problems of their own that didn't include room for an extremely corrupt, quadruple-dealing Latin American dictator with a complexion so acne-scarred his nickname was Pineapple Face. Information is rarely concealed so well that it isn't available. It just often isn't popular until it is. The information about Noriega became popular in June 1986 when Seymour Hersh began publishing articles in the New York Times. And Hersh uncovered that Noriega's extracurricular activities were the icing on top of the cake of what he had done at others' behest. As the uncovering of the Iran-Contra affair gained momentum, Noriega's fate came closer. He felt betrayed by the U.S., although he had facilitated the cartels, sold U.S. intelligence, and supplied weapons to the Sandinistas. He felt that he was being completely loyal and punished unjustly. He began an anti-American campaign that at times took on comical overtones. "The U.S. is like a monkey on a chain," Noriega said. "All you do is play the music and the monkey performs." It was all set in stone years before the U.S. invaded and arrested Noriega. In 1986, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution that Noriega should step down. It would take 3.5 more years before he was removed. Noriega sponsored violent protests against the embassy, gave interviews with machetes, and sponsored a Christmas display showing the American ambassador shooting Santa Claus. His rhetoric was over the top, but it always had been. When the U.S. indicted Noriega on several counts of narcotics trafficking and racketeering, he could not conceive of the idea that it might come to anything. But he did find it humiliating, and so he redoubled his outbursts. And when his candidate lost in the 1989 election, he resorted to what he had always done in the past: ignored the results. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, certainly no ally of the Republican administration, monitored the election. He didn't mince words at the results. "The government is taking the election by fraud. It's robbing the people of Panama of their rights. I hope there will be a worldwide outcry of condemnation against a dictator who stole this election from his own people." Outcries weren't particularly something General Manuel Noriega cared about. After the election, during a demonstration, the opposition candidate who had actually won was kidnapped and beaten severely, along with the vice president-elects. But Noriega's problems were not just an America increasingly dissatisfied with him. One did not simply decide to stop working with the cartels. The cartels decided when one was done working with them, and they were not done with General Manuel Noriega. They sent him a sign, a small carved coffin with his initials on it. Inside was a videotape made of private moments with Noriega's daughters. The threat was quite clear. We can get as close as we want to everything you love. The campaign against America was stepped up, with the abuse of American service members and American citizens becoming a feature rather than a bug. Harassment was physical and on more than one occasion targeted pregnant women. There were rape incidents, and everything continued to escalate. On October 1st, Noriega ordered that any and all American aircraft above Panama be shot down. The U.S.'s force buildup in the Canal Zone and their military exercises had enraged him. He wanted revenge. But this was too far for one of his most loyal officers, who turned against him and attempted a coup with the knowledge of American representatives in the Canal Zone. The support promised didn't materialize, and the coup was put down. The ringleader was tortured and executed. The blame football for the aborted coup was passed around those Americans who were involved like a hot potato, to mix metaphors. And 1989 continued on in Panama with an air of uncertain expectation. But as often happens, the House of Cards collapsed on December 16, 1989, with a National Assembly resolution stating the Republic of Panama is declared to be in a state of war while the aggression lasts. U.S. strikes began on December 20th. While Noriega was ensconced in a hotel room with a sometime girlfriend, as opposed to his wife, his official mistress, one of his other part-time girlfriends, or a prostitute, when the American strike began. He evaded U.S. forces for several days, managing to get a radio broadcast to the resistance out. He made his way to the Nunciatore, where he remained for several days. Part of that time having loud music blasted outside to get him to surrender, including the song Panama. He did eventually surrender on January 3, 1990. Taken to the Canal Zone, he was formally arrested by DEA agents and flown to Miami, where the legal process took over. And now, 36 years later, history has rhymed. It has rhymed with Shakespearean precision. Although a poll taken just after the invasion of Panama showed more than 90% approval of the removal of Noriega, just 1 year later, things were not viewed so favorably. Most problematic was the U.S. promise of $1 billion in rebuilding aid, which never materialized. Damaged infrastructure remained, and jobs were hard to come by. Panamanians were in dire financial straits. In 2017, December 20th, the first day of the U.S. invasion, began being commemorated in Panama as a national day of mourning. As Shakespeare told us in The Tempest, what is past is prologue. But that also means that every prologue is a past, and so everything rhymes.
What to do